We're going to get right to our guest. He is the congressman from the 4th District of the great state of Kentucky. Thomas Massie, welcome to the program, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me on today.
Always. Now, you and I have had in-depth conversations at clubs on Capitol Hill and whatnot, and I continue to say you are entirely too educated of a man to be running around Capitol Hill. Why are you still there?
Oh, I don't know. I'm a masochist, I guess. I like taking a beating. And I took a beating 3 weeks ago when I just stood up and said, hey, you all need to vote on this, and there needs to be a quorum here if you're going to pass legislation according to the Constitution. Now, the good news is I think they got the message, and so they're voting in the Senate today and tomorrow in the House of Representatives. Well, tomorrow I'll be driving to D.C., and then on Thursday we'll vote on this bill. So they've really changed their mind. They've decided to follow the Constitution now.
So, Congressman Massie, have you seen this bill? When do you actually get to read this bill? Because we saw your tweet saying we should just be voting on one thing, putting one thing in the bill at a time. But it sounds like there's a lot more in this bill than just the PPP.
Yeah, that's the frustrating thing about these bills. They're like giant omnibus bills. And there are parts of this bill that I agree with that I could vote for. For instance, expanded testing. I think having lots of testing is one of the ways to get us out of this economic shutdown. But that's only $25 billion of a $484 billion package that's going to have money to hospitals, to bail out hospitals. The problem is our governors are shutting down our hospitals. They're empty. In some of the rural states like Kentucky, they're laying off nurses and doctors. They have no revenue. And so the federal government's going to come in and bail them out. I don't like that. I think we should open the hospitals back up. But, you know, in order to vote for the testing, I would have to vote for the bailouts and the hospitals and all this other stuff. That's a frustrating thing. I think the American people know that we need to separate these bills into their components, debate them individually, and then vote on those individually. Because the president doesn't have a line item veto. And so we need to do line item legislation. One bill, one topic.
Congressman Massie, we're talking about $480 billion on top of $2.2 trillion, on top of $8.3 billion, on top of another stimulus bill. Where's this money coming from?
It's coming from the taxpayers. Eventually, it's all got to be paid back. They're printing money. We're going to pay for it in terms of inflation here pretty soon if the money keeps going out the door. And the $2 trillion bill is actually going to be leveraged into $6 trillion. And if you can believe this, 3 weeks ago when they were trying to get me to vote for this bill, they told me the reason it's such an enormous bill is so we don't have to come back until August. And I didn't believe them now, but if I did, I definitely wouldn't today. I mean, I didn't believe them then. If I did, I definitely wouldn't today because, I mean, here they are asking for another $500 billion. There's no end to this.
So you just kind of shocked me. Is that like, so they don't have to come back and work until August? This is not the question I was expecting to ask, but is that what you're saying?
Well, that was one of the inducements, I think, was if they made it big enough, we wouldn't have to come back to Congress and work anymore. Of course, I'm in favor of making people work. That's another thing, by the way, that's going to be on the docket, supposedly, is the ability to vote either remotely or by proxy. And, of course, I would prefer that we show up in person and vote. But if my colleagues can't or won't come to Congress, then I would prefer to have remote or proxy voting over not voting at all. We can't just not vote at all and let Nancy Pelosi pass everything on her own.
Well, she's got her gourmet ice cream, so there is that. But let's change subjects here because you're one of the authors of this Prime Act for our food supply because we're seeing places like Smithfield Foods and our pork industry are getting hammered. Tell us about it.
Yeah, for 5 years I've been screaming that our food supply is too brittle. We rely on 4 meat packers to prepare all of the beef. Now there are hundreds of thousands of farmers in the United States, but it all goes through mostly 4 packers. And I've said this is too brittle. We've got thousands of small individual processing plants, but the USDA has regulated them to the point where they can't sell their beef in grocery stores or to restaurants. And I have said that we need to allow these small meat packers to, and this was before the crisis, I said allow the small meat packers to help farmers sell to local consumers and get, the USDA can still be involved to some degree, and they will be, but they have overregulated these folks, and we're going to be in this unique and troubling scenario where farmers are going to have to euthanize animals because there aren't enough processing plants open, yet we're going to have these small processing plants open that the farmers aren't allowed to use. So my bill, which has Democrats and Republicans, and it's got senators and members of the House on it, says let the small farmers use the small processors and sell in the local grocery stores.
So many things the president has done to reduce regulations in other areas, and people have gone crazy and said these regulations were in for a reason. But they weren't really. There weren't valid reasons, and they kind of got slipped through. So what do you say to people who come to you and say, well, these regulations must be there for a reason? How does this help, and what are some of the regulations you'd like to see relaxed?
Yeah, obviously, the big meat packers would tell you that you need these regulations, because what these regulations do is they squash the little guys and they make it so that the big meat packers have no competition. I think that's why people are reluctant to relax the regulations, even in a time of crisis. It's almost as if the regulators would rather see people starve than to let up on the regulations, because what they're worried about is that we discover, oh, wow, people are still safe. In fact, they're safer because they're eating local food instead of buying food that's been shipped across the country. And so they don't want to relax regulations because they're afraid when we come back out of this crisis that people will have an existence proof for why we don't need so many regulations. But just to assure you, the meat packers, the small meat packers that I'm talking about, they're inspected by their local health departments. In some cases, they're inspected by the state, and they're subject to surprise inspections from the USDA, and they're safe. And oh, by the way, they provide meat to consumers already, but it has to be consumers who've already bought the animal and are having it slaughtered themselves. None of those consumers have ever gotten sick. And so what I'm saying is, let them provide the service. They're safe, they're clean, they're effective, they're affordable, and we can keep animals from being wasted and people from going hungry.
So, Congressman Massie, you're talking about this Prime Act, you're talking about other bills, we're talking about stimulus. How is the business of Congress getting done with people not there? Because you said, hey, come back and vote. We don't have a full quorum. How's it getting done?
It's not. There are no hearings happening right now. We should be doing hearings. We should be calling these doctors in. We should be evaluating their models that they use to shut down the government. We should, look at the different treatments for this virus. We should be having hearings. We're not. Instead, you've got Mnuchin and Pelosi and Schumer who are basically writing legislation. It's almost like the White House is representing the Republicans in Congress. They're basically AWOL, and Pelosi gets a say in it. But rank and file members like me, even committee chairmen, aren't really involved in this process.
That's what I wanted to ask you. We keep hearing that Mnuchin is in there and he is negotiating with the Democrats. So we have our elected officials that we think are fighting for us. So when you go in there on Thursday, do you have a say in what goes into this bill, or are you just a yes or a no? Because as the people of America, we want to know what our congressman has, what power they have to represent us.
When we get there on Thursday, it's going to be take it or leave it. They aren't going to allow us to really even debate this bill. They certainly won't allow common sense amendments to improve the bill. They're going to say, take it or leave it. You don't get to do the legislation, up or down vote, and then get out of town. That's what they'll do.
Well, Congressman Massie, we've got about 90 seconds left here. Where are the other Thomas Massies of Congress? Where are the people that actually believe in how our republic works and actually follow the Constitution and the guidelines set forth?
Well, there's some great members of Congress. Andy Biggs from Arizona, Chip Roy from Texas. It's just, the problem is they're being shouted out by the liberals and frankly, even some of the squishy members of our Republican caucus. And, I wouldn't do this if I didn't have at least some friends in Congress. I say Congress has a 9% approval rating, so I'm making friends with those 9%. But there are some good people there who are fighting for their states. And Matt Gaetz is another great one from Florida who's been helping me on these issues. We need more of us, frankly. They've accused me of worrying too much about the process or these archaic rules. but I'm just quoting the Constitution to them. And these aren't some archaic House rules or some parliamentary procedure. I'm just saying follow the Constitution, darn it.
Well, Congressman Massie, God bless you, and thank you for all that you do. At least someone standing up for the document that America is actually founded on. And thank you for joining us on America's Voice Live.
Thanks for having me on.